Wasn't planning for that tonight. He's a committed teacher, so that's all good. All right, let's just make sure this is working. Where am I? It's hard to find yourself live. There we are. All right, it's loading. Failed to load live broadcast. Ooh, hope that's not failing for everyone. There we are. Is that good? Yeah, all right. It's a little bit delayed. Pregnant people know how to party. Tuesday night, live on Facebook. Welcome. I feel like we've got this little family together, and I just feel so connected to you all. So many of you are messaging me and buying my programs. Thank you so much for doing that. I really appreciate your hard-earned dollar bucks now more than ever, and your support. So thank you so much, and thank you for really connecting. Feel free to tag me, take some pictures of you guys watching the class. I'd love to see you as much as you're seeing me. Maybe don't film the whole video, like don't film yourself watching me the whole time. That could get a little bit boring. I don't really want to watch myself. For those of you that have my programs, there's going to be a whole lot added to it over the next couple of weeks in terms of content for pregnancy, labour, birth and postnatal, just information. A lot of what we've gone through in these classes, but in short little bits that you can read and links to a whole lot of information. And if you're struggling with internet quality, it's because I'm on a really high quality setting. So if you just go to the settings of the videos, tone it back to a really to a low setting like 240 or something, it'll stream a whole lot easier. And if you haven't started because of the equipment, please get into it. You don't actually need that much equipment to start, and there is a lot of things you can modify with just using stuff around the house, and I go through that in the videos. All right, not gonna lie, this show tonight, and let's just face it, I was born to have my own TV show, so we're just gonna continue to call them shows rather than antenatal classes, antenatal shows. We'll probably go longer than an hour. We all know I love to talk, but I'll try and tame it back a little bit. All right, hopefully this is working. It's not working on my screen. Oh, dear me. Oh, well. If I'm talking to myself for the next hour and a half and all of you guys are trying to figure out where I've gone, we'll just do this tomorrow night. That's cool. All right, the first thing, a couple of you have been asking me about birth support people and specifically asking about Mick. Now, Mick isn't the best person when it comes to talking about birth support people for a couple of reasons. I was a midwife for 10 years before I gave birth, and we'd been together for 7 of those years. I often caught him at parties talking to pregnant people and just random strangers about birth and trying to convince them to have a home birth and trying to convince them to have a midwife and basically telling them everything that I'm telling you, he would just relay to them. So he totally believed in labour and birth. I spoke to him about it, and he's gonna come in for a bit of this if he can get off the phone to his student. But his biggest thing was what we kind of both agreed on. He read Rhea Dempsey's Birth with Confidence on his own, in his own time. He was really well informed. He trusted the process. Now, being a birth support person can be the hardest role in that room. And I think I touched on this last week, but when I've cared for someone the whole way through their pregnancy, I really care about them, but I don't love them like a partner or a mother or a sister or an auntie or a really good friend would. And it is really hard to watch somebody go to the deepest depths of physical and emotional and mental vulnerability, which is what labour does. It's a huge physical and mental roller coaster. And often a lot of birth support people feel helpless and useless. But listen to the word in your role, support. You're there to support them, and the best way you can do that is to actually understand what they're going through physiologically, be comfortable with that, and be comfortable with the pain, and be strong. And it's not your time to not be strong. And not many people are going to love me for saying this, but it's the absolute truth. A lot of the time I spend more time in labour when a person's in labour looking after their partner or their support people than I do the person in labour. If you don't want to be there, you have 2 options right now. Work through why you don't want to be there and get onto your fears and what you're worried about, and start being proactive and addressing it and figuring out how you can A, overcome your fears, and B, be the best support person, or don't be there. And that's a really hard thing for people to hear, especially if it's a partner. But what happens when your partner or birth support person is not comfortable with being at the birth is it really hinders it and it really disturbs it. And I've been at too many births where the birthing person has cared too much about what their partner or their support people are thinking or doing, and feeling like they have to care for them, that they don't get into labour properly. And that's the same with children. I'm a big advocate of children being there, but sometimes they hinder it as well. So your space is what facilitates or prevents birth from going on. It's the biggest contributing factor, the people in it and the environment itself. And if they're not conducive to labour, then that is an extra thing you're going to have to work through. It's a really important issue to address now. But if you want to know, if you're a birth support person out there going, what can I do? Get informed, trust the process, be strong, train yourself to be strong enough to watch somebody be vulnerable and watch somebody in a lot of physiologial pain, and be the best cheerleader you could possibly be. Get your pom-poms out. All right, so that's birth support. I will just touch on, if you have somebody there who has given birth as your birth support person and they have birth trauma and they haven't addressed it, or it's your mum, because mums watching their babies give birth brings back a lot of their birth memories, but it's also really hard to watch your child go through something challenging. And so those people really need to address those issues as well. All right. I also want to say that right now we're talking about normal. We're talking about healthy, low-risk women. Lots of you have gestational diabetes. Lots of you know you're going to get induced or have planned Caesars. Some of you have twins. Lots of you are wanting info on VBAC. We are going to get to that next week. I understand that some of you are nearing your due date. And if you really want great information, evidence-based birth, the website that I popped up in that first week is the best place for finding research, and also being really well equipped to have good discussions with your care providers. Please remember, it is your choice. Birth should be the most empowering event of your life, not the most feared event. Don't give a shit about us, all right? We remember, some of you, most of you, we forget. You never ever forget your labour and birth. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to upset your care provider and challenge us, okay? The most important thing is that you understand the risks. There's risks in everything that we do. Every time we walk outside our door, not even we don't have to walk outside the door. There's risks everywhere, every moment of our day. And it's about accepting the risks that are right for you and being comfortable with that. We live in a very, it's getting easier and easier to sue. And unfortunately, some of our practice is shifting from evidence-based to fear-based because we're scared of being sued. And I'm not a doctor. I started out in medicine, and I'm so glad I changed to midwifery, and because the world is getting a scarier place in terms of medical, legal ramifications of things. And I totally understand where my colleagues come from sometimes when they switch to fear-based practice. But if you're willing to do the research and understand the information and the risks and take that responsibility on yourself, then there is no argument to that. We document, and that's the end of it, and you get your choice. Okay, on Instagram, if you don't follow me on there, you're not cool enough, so get onto IG. On Thursday night at 8 o'clock, we're going to be doing a live chat with the birth mapping expert. So she's a chickadee who's written a book, and super intelligent woman doing her PhD in birth maps. I met her at a conference recently, and she's agreed to come on live on Instagram, and I'm going to film it and pop it in the pregnancy program, so if you can't watch it live, it'll be there. So last week we finished up with augmentation of labour. So what is augmentation? So we've been talking about spontaneous labour. And when I was writing my thesis, I'm really scared you guys aren't on here. I did this last week. I've got an online program and I'm still not tech savvy. So we've been talking about, I might be way too close to the screen, sorry about that if I am, spontaneous labour. So when I was writing, no, there I am. Oh, look how good I look tonight. Don't have my glasses on, so if I can't see my notes, it's going to be... Ugh. Spontaneous labour. When I was writing my thesis, Mick was like, spontaneous, is that like, oh, can I have a cheeseburger and a can of Coke and whoa, just had a baby? Doesn't happen like that for everyone. It might happen for a very small minority, but spontaneous just means you've gone into labour yourself. Induction means you haven't gone into labour and you've been induced, and so we have medically started the labour for you. Augmentation means you've spontaneously laboured and then we've interfered with medical intervention, being that of rupturing your membrane, so that hook that we talked about last week, so breaking your waters or releasing your waters, whatever terminology you like to use, and or as well as breaking your waters, the drip may be started. So the drip is syntocinon, which is the fake version of oxytocin. We're going to talk more about that in induction next week, but that's augmentation. So let's look at why it happens. You may have heard the term failure to progress. I never ever use it, and that's because language is really important around pregnant people and birthing people. And when you say failure, you put it onto the person, when really it's often a failure of us. It's a failure of our society for not understanding birth well enough. It's often a failure to wait. Because as I said last week, if you are a healthy woman that's gone into spontaneous labour, your cervix acts as well as your legs. If your legs can walk, your cervix can dilate. And so many women say, I just don't dilate. And it's not that your cervix was incapable of doing that action, it's that everything around you failed. So if you've been termed a person who has failed to progress, get rid of it. Put that failure onto something else. Figure out what it was that happened in your labour, and put that blame on them, because it is not on you. The term we like to use, which is much nicer, is called labour dystocia, and that means it got stuck. Something stalled it. Now, there is a huge lack of universal consensus on this, on what is the definition of prolonged labour. What is the definition of a labour that is too long? We know that 1 in 5 people who go into labour on their own will end up with a caesarean. That is massive, absolutely massive, and that's in a hospital system. We know that at home birth that doesn't, the numbers are very, very, very minimal. When I worked in Melbourne at a home birth, we had a caesarean rate of women choosing home birth at 1%. We used to have to present our stats all the time on home birth every month, and the doctors were like, why is this number so low? And obviously they were healthy, low-risk women. So we take out elective Caesars and we take out women being induced for medical reasons, but just healthy, low-risk women. And so that is about 20%, about 16% in the hospital setting, and it was 1% for us where I worked in Melbourne. And we had high home birth rates there. And the doctors are always like, why? We need to do research into this. And us midwives were like, well, it's simple. It's hormones. It's not being disturbed. It's women being well informed and trusting their birth. So basically, where did it all come from? Back in the 50s, 1955 to be exact, this guy called Friedman developed this curve. Now, he basically watched women in labour, tracked it out, curved out their progress, and said that for a first-time person giving birth from 0 to 10 centimetres, so not the birth bit, the labour bit, it takes 14 hours. And for a second or subsequent birth, it takes 8. Now, that study was based on 500 people in one hospital, and they were all Caucasian. And we used that evidence for 60 years, more, 70 years, worldwide. And when I was in the Solomons, they were still plotting it out exactly to that graph, because that's what we taught them back in the 60s and 70s when we'd gone over there to help. Now, In 2012, there was a massive conference around preventing the first cesarean, because in Australia and most of high-income countries around the world, the highest reason, or the most common reason for having a cesarean is a repeat cesarean. So the most common reason we have for doing cesareans is because someone's already had one. That's the most common reason given. And so we know that if we can prevent the first cesarean, we can prevent more cesareans from occurring. And so there was this massive conference worldwide where people, he's back, hey babe. I think I'm right. I'm watching my arms flap around on that screen. So they had this big,
it's fine.
It's fine. He's just staring at me.
Yeah.
They had this big conference and they looked at ways that they could prevent. Oh, is that better?
Yeah.
I can't see my nose hairs anymore. He's like, oh, don't do that. Be professional. They're all my friends, babe. Good. We're all really close now. So I looked at what are the reasons labour gets lengthened. And so I'm going to go through them just in brief, and then we're going to talk about that. So overweight and obese people, people over 40, posterior babies. So we've talked about that a lot, baby's position. If you haven't gone on to Spinning Babies yet, please do. It's an amazing resource. There's things that are free, there's things you pay for. I'm not affiliated. I just think they're brilliant. I've done their workshops, and the midwives I've worked with have done their workshops. And we had a great birth over the weekend where we used those techniques. I'll talk about that later. So posterior baby, asynclitic head. So this basically means that baby's head's like that, okay? So rather than it coming down nice and straight, it comes down to the side, and so it doesn't apply even pressure on the cervix. Dehydration confined to a bed. Now, beds came into labour and birth when I think it was King, who's that weird king? Who's that weird king? Something the fifth, King Henry V, there we go. He wanted to watch his 16th wife have a baby, and so that's really where beds started coming into it. They also came into it for OHS reasons and our backs, but it doesn't make sense that we would get up really high to birth our babies. If you watch any animal in a natural state, and we are an animal, they get down low, often in a corner, in a safe space to do so. The other thing with beds is that it shifts your state, your mental state. And so when you go on a hospital bed, there's a state of vulnerability, there's a state of sickness rather than wellness, and it really shifts you. Same with things like wearing hospital gowns. That's why wearing your own clothes is really important. So it's all trying to shift you into that wellness, you can do this, everything's normal kind of state. So confined to the bed lengthens your labour. Dehydration, sexual abuse, pre-labour rupture of membranes. So we talked about that last week, where your waters break and you don't go into labour. Your first birth is obviously longer than your subsequent births for most people, and big babies. And I'm not going to touch on that just yet. We'll talk about that next week. And look, whilst this list has evidence behind it, and we do see it in practice, the biggest thing they've left off this list is disturbed birth and hormones, and that simple understanding of how labour works in the first place. They've come at it at a very medical, modern health aspect, and forgot about the psychology, which is the biggest factor. And we really understand sports psychology, and all our sports stars have sports psychologists. It's actually the degree I first started out in, funny or not, when I first left school, because it's so fascinating. But birth psychology underpins everything, and to totally miss that out and look at the reasons that affect that is in my opinion negligent. So people's health gets blamed a lot. But what about the system, and what about society? And society has a lot to answer for as well, because we don't understand labour and birth, and we're not well informed about care providers in place of birth, which I hope by the end of this tonight you will all be. So what they also discovered at this conference was that actually active labour, so where those contractions are really quite rhythmic and you know, you're getting 4 contractions in 10 minutes. And what we call active labour, we used to think it started at 4 centimetres, and after this conference it was kind of like, hang on a second, we think it starts at 6. And that's because the research now has shown that from 0 to 6 centimetres there are often long periods where the cervix does nothing. And it doesn't dilate, and it doesn't dilate the way Friedman had curved it, you know, 1 centimetre every hour and a half. We still really think like that in hospital systems. It's ingrained in us, and we need to, because, you know, like I said, in Melbourne we had 10 birth rooms and 16 births a day. We're going to get you in and out, in and out. And so, you know, if you're not progressing to our schedule, then we've got to do something about it. And that's often what happens with prolonged labour. So we know, research shows us over and over again, the sooner in your labour that you present to hospital, the higher your risk of caesarean section. Okay? So if you want to prevent a caesarean section and you're a healthy, well woman, stay at home. That stay at home thing on Instagram and all the stories needs to stay around for labouring women forever. We need to keep that sticker. I think it's a sticker. And so I cared for a woman over the weekend. We had a birth. She was a very good friend of mine, and she came in over my night shift, and she'd been going, like, you know, period pain started 8 o'clock Saturday, and it was early labour all day Saturday, all through the night Saturday night. And, you know, she came in at early hours Sunday morning. She knew and I knew she shouldn't be there yet. And we kind of hung out for a little bit to see if labour would establish. And this is for all people birthing. It is as much as a physical roller coaster as it is a mental and emotional, and just especially for your first birth. For your first birth, it's like the universe, it challenges you. And I know that sounds really airy-fairy, but if you've got stuff to work through, whether it be in your relationship, whether it be in your past, whether it be with you, you're going to work through it in your labour. And for me, I trusted birth like no one else, but I didn't trust myself in birthing. I've had a lot of illnesses and operations. You know, I'm completely deaf in one of my ears from a virus that got in. I've had every known virus under the sun, from cytomegalo to glandular to Ross River. I've had quite an unwell history, and then I was severely incontinent as a 19-year-old, and then in pregnancy it was just horrific, which is the reason my programs started, and why I developed Core and Floor. And so I believed in everyone else's ability to birth, but I didn't believe in my own. And I know it took me a long time to get to 6 centimetres because I was fighting it. I was fighting my own ability, and I went through every single woman's labour I'd ever been at to get strength. And this is what I want to say as well. I know in terms of birthing in COVID, lots of people have been restricted to, everyone's been restricted as to who they can have with them. And whilst physical people being there are great, sometimes they're a hindrance, sometimes they're great, you can still have people there with you. My nonna and my nan were with me my whole labour. And I know that's really spiritual, and I'm not a huge spiritual person, but I just thought of them for my whole labour, and they really got me through. One woman every 2 minutes birth in Australia, and 350,000 women birth a year. In the Solomon Islands where I worked, everyone laboured together. And I know this is going to sound weird, and I may have lost a few people by now, but I wish women laboured together in the same room, because it just worked beautifully. There was none of that poor me attitude. There was this huge energy of, we're all doing this together and we can all do it. And she would have a contraction, and then she would rub her back, and then she would have a contraction, and then one would walk into the birth room, come out with a baby, and it'd be like this, okay, we can all do this, we can get our babies. And it was just magical. It was absolutely phenomenal to watch women labour together, and I'll never ever get an experience like that than when I was in the Solomons, because it just won't happen here. And lots of people are probably going, thank goodness, I don't want to labour with another woman. But we were a small island and lots of people, everyone knew everyone too. So there was that sisterhood really happening. So back to this woman on the weekend. She prepared herself better than anyone I've ever known. She was so physically fit. She was classified at a BMI over 35. She lost 10 kilos during her pregnancy. She was 10 kilos lighter at the start than she was at the end. She used my program. She worked her ass off. She knew everything there was to know about labour and birth, and she was so well prepared, probably too well prepared, because she did two things in early labour. She overthought everything, which is really common, especially for first timers, because there's a huge fear of the unknown, and I get that. I've been there myself. What if? What about this? What if this? What if that? And you're never going to get those answers until afterwards. Now, hindsight's a beautiful thing. So that's normal. You're allowed to have some fear. You're totally allowed to have it. It is normal. And it's not going to, it's not going to hinder your labour once you're in labour. The other thing she did was she really worried about a partner, and she thought way too much about him and what he was doing. And so I had a very stern, hard talk to her and sent her home. She came back. And she came back around 8:39. She laboured all day. She had the most incredible water birth later on in the evening. Physiological third stage, which we'll talk about next week, completely drug-free. And I can't tell you, I don't think I've ever been more proud of anyone in my entire life, because she absolutely rocked it. I'm so emotional, sorry team. But if she had been somewhere else, if she hadn't gone home, if she had come in the day before, if she hadn't been so well informed and wanted everything so much, and had she not had such supportive, incredible midwives, because my colleagues did the most incredible job looking after her. So her baby was also posterior. So it's not always mental, yeah? It's not always what you carry with you. Baby and positioning has a huge impact. And this is why I'm a huge advocate of seeing an osteopath or an SOT chiropractor or a physio or a mixture of both in your labour and birth, and really releasing those hips and being active, exercising every single day, trying to get baby into the best position. But my colleagues did an amazing job of using spinning babies techniques. And if your midwife or doctor doesn't know them, you learn them yourself, or get your birth support partner to learn them, because they're phenomenal. And so they helped baby move from a posterior to an anterior position and straighten out its head. And as soon as it did it, she went on. And I had said when I handed over to the midwives, she's going to struggle until she gets to 6 centimeters, and then she'll birth beautifully. And that's what happens to so many women, is that getting to 6 centimeters, and this failure to progress often happens before that 6 centimeter mark, because we haven't seen that dilatation, because it doesn't often happen. The other thing we really need to think about is, what is labour progress? And in our medical world, we only see it as a cervix opening, and it's a lot more than that. You ask any midwife that has sat with women for 12 hours on end, labour progress is a shift in mental state. It's that ability to accept what you're doing and go into it and get into that limbic system. If you've gone from that prefrontal cortex into that limbic system, that is a huge progress of labour. If you've got a baby that has turned from a posterior position to an anterior position, massive, massive progress of labour. If you've got a baby whose head's crooked that then straightens out and gets into a good position, again, that's progressive labour. But unfortunately, we still only see it as that cervix going from 4 to 6 centimetres, or 6 centimetres to 8 centimetres in this tiny time frame. And the best way you can prevent that is to not get to hospital until you're 6 centimetres. Now, I'm going to be inundated with questions going, how do I know if I'm 6 centimetres? You don't. You don't know. And don't do a VE on yourself, because I'm very skilled at VEs and I still stuff them up on myself. Your birth support person will be the best person to watch you and see what you're doing in labour in terms of where you are mentally. You shouldn't be able to talk through contractions. They should be coming rhythmically every minute, lasting for a minute. You should feel like you don't want to do it anymore. And labour's going to throw that at you a few times. I can't do this, I don't want to do it, cut it out, give me a cesarean, all that stuff. But, you really want those strong contractions to be going for a while if it's your first labour before you go into hospital. And don't forget, you can always go home. If you go into hospital and you think this isn't right, you can leave. If everything's normal and healthy, you can leave. All right. So the other thing I want to say about this is if you do get to hospital early and your labour is slower than what we would want it to be, and everything is okay with you and bum, what's the rush? Why are we rushing if everything is okay? And if baby's heart rate's good, if your waters haven't broken yet, and remember the baby is so much, it's easier for that baby to turn and get into a better position when your waters are intact. Someone asked me about dry birth last week. That's not actually a thing anymore. It's an old term that used to be used in my mother's generation. When the waters break, yes, your baby's head may be on the cervix, which is a lot harder than a soft, cushy lot of membranes and fluid. And people sometimes feel that their contractions are stronger and harder because of that. Some people don't. But it's not dry. Your baby is full of liquor and it's constantly weeing. So it makes the water around itself by weeing and drinking it and weeing it out, drinking it and weeing it out. And so that's how it makes more, and it's got that around it in utero. So if you're in labour, you're well, baby's well, but your cervix isn't opening as quickly as the hospital would want it to be, there is no rush. Okay, if complications develop and things, things arise that need to be addressed, then yes, that's a totally different scenario. And we'll go through some of that next week. But if everything is normal, then there shouldn't be any reason to intervene. All right, hopefully that made a lot of sense. So the Cascade of Intervention, we've been talking about this the whole way through, so I'm not going to go on and on about it, but so often we hear, I'm so lucky that I was in a hospital because me and my baby nearly died, or my baby and I nearly died. And that is birth trauma right there. And if that is you, I'm really sorry that you felt that way. But often it's not what you or your body did, it's what we did to you. And when we rewind and we look at the story, it's often a simple case of Cascade of Intervention. So 1 in 3 women in Australia have caesareans, 30%. 45% in private obstetric hospitals, so much higher. The World Health Organization says that our caesarean rate in high-income countries should be 10%. When it goes above 10%, our mortality, which is our death rates, and our morbidity, which is our sickness rates for mums and babies, increases. All right, so it's not a good thing that we have so high caesarean rates. In many countries, their caesarean rates are not high enough. In our country, it is too high, and our birthing people and our babies are suffering physically and emotionally. And in terms of all different sorts of things like breastfeeding rates, to emotional health, to scarring, to problems later on in long-term health like diabetes and breathing, asthma, those kind of things. So when we rewind that woman or that birthing person that had the caesarean and thought her and her baby were going to die, what actually happened? Now, she was a healthy, low-risk woman, that had an induction. Chances are that her reason for induction was her gestation alone. And I've just popped some info in the pregnancy program about this. But most women are induced because they reach around 41 weeks. Now, society has a huge role to play in this. You are not due at 40 weeks. 5% of babies come on their due date. You have a due period. A normal term pregnancy is 37 to 42 weeks. If right now you're looking at an induction because of 41 weeks, please head to Evidence-Based Birth and have a read of it. If you've got my program, head into that section and have a look. I'll address it next week. But what happens is women with healthy babies get induced at 41 weeks. Their body hasn't had a chance to say, I'm ready. And the baby's like, I'm ready, let's do this. Hasn't done that yet. Those hormones haven't been triggered. So we've got an induction. The hormones are not in play, and the drugs are. So your birth is now controlled by the medical world. You have lots more machines, you have lots of drips, you are in that state of sickness already. You've got a cannula in, you've got a drip in, you've got the monitor on the whole time. It may be painful for you. You may have heard inductions were more painful, and so you've already got that in your head. If you're being induced, please don't have that in your head. Yes, you haven't got those endorphins running through your system as well as women who have laboured spontaneously, but it doesn't mean it's more painful. It's just as painful as it's going to be for you in that moment, and the coping mechanisms are exactly the same, all right? And the stuff we went through in the first week, you can use all of those techniques. I have been at hundreds of empowering induction births, and same with cesareans. Often it's not how the baby comes out and what things you had done to you. It's if you felt listened to, if you felt like you had choices, and if you felt in control are the biggest things that affect your satisfaction. So this person gets induced, she's healthy, she's low risk, she gets induced because she's 41 weeks and 3 days. And then she ends up having an epidural because she heard induction's painful, and she's gone into her labour and birth with this mindset that it's going to be more painful. And then it is painful because it's going to be, because that's what labour is, and she's not prepared for that. She hasn't got any of the coping mechanisms. And so she has an epidural. And so the epidural, you've got the catheter in, you've got more fluid, the baby's heart rate might drop, or the baby might get stressed. So with an induction, there is a higher chance of fetal distress because we're controlling the contractions and therefore the oxygen flow to your baby. So you can have too many contractions too quickly or really long contractions. And so all of that, a sudden that happens, but you're fully dilated. So, okay, let's quickly get the baby out. And so we rush downstairs to theatre because we're in theatre just in case. So what does that do to your adrenaline? That's not going to help those labour hormones, which we need behind us anyway, and they're often still very much present in induction. So all of a sudden that's gone off. The contractions have fizzled completely. We end up doing a forceps and that doesn't work, and then all of a sudden we can do a vacuum and we do an episiotomy and that doesn't work, or we end up with a Caesar sometimes. You get what I'm trying to say. All of a sudden it just snowballs, and then the woman and the birth support person and the baby all end up with trauma. So PTSD is a thing that 1 in 10 birth support people experience. Babies who have instrumental births their heads are sore. It does affect their breastfeeding. When you've had all those extra fluids in labour, that does affect breastfeeding. That does affect how you feel. And so all of a sudden you've had all of these things, and here you are going, my baby's heart rate dropped, so thank goodness I was in a hospital and I had medical care, when really it was everything that had happened beforehand. I don't think I explained that very well. I think I was just getting it all up, but I think we've really been addressing it the whole way. And what I want to try and get at is, if you've heard those birth trauma stories, often it's because one thing leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. As soon as we start doing one thing to you, we do more. And that's why we want to prevent that breaking your waters just because things are slow, or popping a cannula in your hand just in case you might bleed, or let's put a gown on you because you've got a high BMI and you've got a higher chance of Caesar. All those things that may seem really little then lead on to bigger things, and that cascade of intervention is what happens, and it's this complete snowball. And at the end of it, we look back and go, well, of course that happened, and you look back and think, oh my goodness, I was really unwell, my baby was really unwell, and I needed that. And if you haven't watched that video I popped up in the first week of the couple trying to conceive a baby in a hospital setting, it perfectly explains the cascade of intervention. And so often what we talk about with the cascade of intervention comes from the disturbing of birth, the disturbing of you so that your oxytocin isn't high, your adrenaline is high, it isn't low where it should be, you're in that prefrontal cortex and you're not in that limbic system. How are we going? I've still got some people listening, so hopefully we're going okay. All right, so the factors that impact your labour and birth the most, what are they? Let me know, tell me. There's lots of comments there. I'll get to them after the show like I normally would. So have you guessed what the 2 factors are? your place of birth and your care provider. In Australia, the two biggest things that impact our labour and birth, that impact our outcomes, are who provides you with care and place of birth. So let's go to who provides you with care first. I started in medicine. I'm an overachiever. I got a ridiculously high year 12 score and I could have done whatever I wanted. And so smart people, I started off in sports psychology and then I was like, oh, smart people, you're meant to become a doctor. And I'm glad I fell out of that and accidentally fell into midwifery, but I would have had a private obstetrician. It's what it's what my mum had. It's probably what my friends would have had going into our late 20s and early 30s. And it's what I knew. I didn't even know what a midwife was. I called midwifery, but I literally opened the UAC guide, the university's guide, and I was like, what am I going to do? And I literally did this. And I was like, oh, midwife, that looks exactly the same as an obstetrician. But it's only 3 years, I'll just do that. So, care provider. 17,500 women have been studied over, I think it's 13 randomized control trials. So when we look at evidence, the highest form of evidence we have is a randomized control trial. So that's where we get women and we go pick a number or pick an envelope basically, and that you open the envelope and it says, okay, I've got midwifery continuity of care, and the other envelope says you've got doctor's care or GP shared care or just standard hospital care. And so there's been, I think it's 13 trials, but it's 17,500 women in Australia and internationally that look at midwifery-led care. So midwifery-led care is where you have your own midwife from the start of your pregnancy, and they're on call for you for your labour and birth, and they follow up postnatally. Basically, the care women have had our entire birthing lives. So people have always birthed with a known care provider. It is a very strange and modern world thing to have someone looking after you that you don't know. We've always birthed in our communities, and there's always been one or two people that take, midwives, parteras, birth assistants, birth attendants, whatever you want to call them. There's always been those people. Midwives and prostitutes, funnily enough, are the oldest professions. So we've always existed. We've always known the person birthing. It's very, very new that we don't. And when we don't know our care provider, there can't be trust there. And I don't like caring for women I don't know in labour, because it's really bloody hard work to get their trust, and they don't deserve that. They don't deserve to meet someone at 7 centimetres and try and establish a relationship. And so we know when we look at the hormones that that's not the conducive thing for birth. So when we've studied midwifery continuity of care compared to GPs and private obstetrics care, we know that these women have the best outcomes. So we know that they have a lower chance of having an epidural, a higher chance of having a vaginal birth, a lower chance of having an instrumental birth, and there has been one pretty big study that was done in Melbourne that lowered caesarean section rate, but overall it doesn't, the research doesn't support that. It says it doesn't impact caesarean section. We also know, and this is the biggest thing, that women that have their own midwives have a 24% reduction in premature birth. Now, premature birth is the highest cause of child mortality under 5 in high-income countries. And so worldwide, all these paediatricians are going, why? Why is this midwifery care so, how does it have such a huge effect on preterm birth? And we don't understand that yet, but all the midwives in the academic world believe that it comes down to stress levels and adrenaline. And that feeling of safety and having that connection to someone and trust. The other thing that it decreases is loss of a baby. Okay, so it is the safest form of care and the associated with the most benefits. But in our society, we value doctors, and rightly so. Don't get me wrong, they are absolutely incredible. And in terms of obstetricians, I've worked with some amazing ones, but the ones I've worked with that are amazing, I've worked in the public health system, and they stick to doing what they do best, and that's caring for high-risk women and women who are low risk but develop complications. Obstetricians in public hospitals don't care for healthy women. It's not what they've trained in. Medicine, to become an obstetrician, you have to have done medicine. Medicine studies sickness, it studies disease, it studies treating people, curing things, fixing things. Labour and birth, when it's normal and healthy, is a physiological event. The best maternity care we give is when we provide collaborative care. So please don't think I'm doctor bashing here, but what I want is for you to understand the evidence behind this, and have the best care provided that is right for you and your family. And every woman, regardless of her risk factor, should have a known midwife, and that's what we fight for. I was on the board of directors for the Australian College of Midwives for a while, and we fight really, really hard for this, but we don't have the money that obstetrics do. We don't have that kind of power to lobby politicians, but we have the research, and we have the women that support us, which will, in the long term, get us what we want. I truly believe in that. But understanding that, and understanding that when you have your own midwife, you have the highest chance of having the best outcomes and the highest satisfaction with care, I might add as well, is really important. So we value paying for things in society. When there is a high price associated with things, we often think it comes with a higher quality of care. And so I think with private obstetrics, you pay for it. You've got a doctor, so you've got someone that's really well researched in that area and really trained to provide you with care, but they're not trained in normal physiological labour and birth. They don't spend 12 to 16 hours with a woman in a room. When you have private obstetric care, who's looking after you in labour and birth? Midwives. It's still midwives. And so having a midwife that is able to work and lead your care, so they're your primary caregivers, and they only refer to doctors or physios or nutritionists or dietitians or diabetes educators when there's a need to. And so I think there's a lot of misconception out there around private obstetric care and not understanding that it is actually associated with the highest intervention rates. So as I said before, public hospitals nationwide, average rate of caesareans 30%, private hospitals 45%. That is a huge jump, and some private obstetricians have much higher rates. So I'm not going to go on and on about that. If you want more information, it's in my program. Otherwise, Google Scholar, you'll get the Cochrane Review pretty quickly. But midwives are specialists in normal birth. We are trained to know everything there is about labour and birth. And it's not like you are completely healthy and then all of a sudden you've got a really unwell mum and baby. If there's complications that are going to arise, they come out like a ripple in the water and you see them straight away. It might just be a temperature, it might just be a deceleration that you hear in the heart rate, and we are trained to treat that. We can do everything, which is why we do home birth, except instrumental birth and caesareans. And in a hospital, if you need those, they don't happen like that. There's still often a 30-minute wait. In a private hospital, there's not always surgical people on hand. They have to get called in. And same in smaller hospital units as well. And that's why home birth works as well, because the transfer time is often just the same. All right, so that's care provider. Place of birth. I'm going to get on my home birth bandwagon for 2 seconds. And I know that most people out there, this is not going to apply to specifically or directly to you. But it is really important that you understand this research so that as a society, we can start to address health issues, especially around maternity health issues, especially birth trauma, better. And the more we can support the best evidence birth, the better. So as I said to you, I would have had a private obstetrician and an elective caesarean. I can remember being in like year 9 PE, being petrified about giving birth and being like, why would anyone do that? Like, just cut it out. Honestly, an operation looks like the easiest option. And I'm just going to touch on that quickly. I have cared for numerous women that have had vaginal births and then had to have a Caesar for some reason, be it breech or some complication in a second or third or fourth pregnancy. None of them have turned around and said they would elect to have a caesarean section. None of them, not one. They've all said, I don't know why women would elect to have this. Now, in saying that, you can have a beautiful elective cesarean, and you can have a beautiful emergency Caesar, but that's just what all women have ever said, and that I think comes down to hormones and that sense of empowerment. So I would have had private obstetrician, elective cesarean, fell into midwifery very accidentally, got informed and got experience. And I remember the first home birth I ever went to. So the only home birth I've worked in was in Alice Springs in Melbourne, and it was under a hospital setting. So there's 16 places in Australia that offer home birth free of charge under a hospital umbrella. So everyone's really for it, and the doctors support it, and it works absolutely beautifully, and it should be everywhere. And the reason I wanted to touch on this too is that often people think home birth isn't for them, and it's because they don't understand how it works and they don't understand the research behind it. And in publicly funded home birth, so many women that got to know me and their other care providers and looked at all the equipment we bring. We bring everything to home birth. We have all the same drugs the hospital does. We have the same equipment for resuscitating baby. We have it all there. We have oxygen cylinders there. It's all there. And a lot of people go, I don't want to have a home birth because of the mess. We do that too. There's actually a really cool bumper sticker that says have a home birth because we clean up the mess. And so if they're your reasons, please don't let them be the reasons that prevent you. But often partners were really against it, and because they didn't understand it, or family members. And then they see everything we bring and they get to know us and they understand how skilled we are, and they're like, oh, actually, it just means I don't have to get in the car because you're going to labour at home anyway. Yeah, okay, you come to me. And so what we've established these programs, and we wouldn't have been able to establish them under the government if home birth wasn't safe. So there's been a recent study that was published in 2019, and it said that home birth was safe, and it wasn't only safe, it was safer for women having their second or more babies. So when you have a home birth compared to a hospital birth, you are 6 times more likely to have a spontaneous vaginal birth. So you are much less likely to have instrumental, forceps, epidural, all the rest of it, compared to the same risk women as you that birth in hospital. So we now know that home birth isn't only safe for babies and safe for birthing people, it is safer for birthing people in terms of intervention. So I often get labelled a hippie because I've had a home birth, and I'm not a hippie, I'm an academic. I love research, I'm a published author, I'm about to embark on my PhD in the next couple of years, and I'm really, really passionate about people really understanding that home birth is safe. Often home birth gets given a really bad name, and it's not home birth, it's free birth. We talked about that last week. So please just understand that. Please maybe just open your minds a little bit if you're a bit close to home birth, and understand that it's not everything you see on the front page newspaper. We lose babies in hospitals too, much more than we do at home birth, and it doesn't hit the front page. And I don't want it to, because I don't want anyone to be scared of where they're giving birth. But I wish it didn't for home birth either, and it really hasn't in the last couple of years. It's, we're seeing much more evidence and much more positivity about it. But yeah, your safest place to give birth, if you're a healthy low risk woman, is home, then a birth centre, then a hospital, public hospital, then private. Private has the highest rates of intervention. The best person to look after you is a known midwife, in terms of having them the whole way through. All right, I think I've covered everything. I'll jump off my bandwagon now. I'm sorry, but that really had to be addressed. We need to know that as a society and support women a hell of a lot better. And I don't care if you have a home birth, a hospital birth, a private obstetric birth, elective cesarean, or anything else. All I care about is that you walk away and go, that was the best thing ever. And it may not go to how you want it to. I don't use birth plans because you can't plan a birth. never been at a birth that's been planned, you can have preferences, and sometimes those preferences don't get met. But if you've been listened to, if you've been able to make a choice, if you feel like you had some sense of control, even an emergency cesarean where you've had that cascade of intervention can still be the most empowering event of your entire life, because you still did it. You did it the way you wanted to, and you gave it your best shot. And that will look different for everyone, but as long as that's what you get, that's all I really care about. I can remember being at the very last birth I was at before I went on mat leave with Banjo, and for me it was horrendous. And I am never the same midwife. I am the midwife the birthing person needs me to be. I have to adapt. There's definitely my favourite type of midwife that I love being, but then I don't always get to be that, and because it's not my birth, it's the birthing person's birth. So this woman had an epidural. She didn't want a partner there, and so he'd left to move the car. I can't tell you how many partners I've had move the car when their car doesn't need to be moved, and that brings me back to that very first thing we talked about at the start. If birth support people don't want to be there, they shouldn't be there. And so her partner had left. It was just her and I in the room. She was watching a fishing show. She was totally out of it. She was not in her birth at all. And so she just watched this fishing show. She was fixated on it and gave birth that way. And that was an amazing birth for her. She loved it. It's exactly what she wanted. I actually went home and cried because I was 36 weeks pregnant, and that was the last birth I was left with. And that for me wasn't an empowering birth, but it makes no difference what it means to me. It makes no difference what it means to your care providers. You live with it for the rest of your life, and so does your partner. And just do whatever you want. All right. Okay. We've finally finished the labour bit, and we're up to the best bit ever. So birth, the second stage. I just want to touch on, I've just seen a note here that I've written too. There's a couple of things I've missed. Sorry, we haven't finished. So often with first births, they can be traumatic. And so as a midwife, my two favourite births are second births and VBAC, so vaginal birth after cesarean, which we're going to talk about next week. And second births are often really, really healing births for a lot of people. And I think they work so well because you go into them with so much confidence. That fear of the unknown is gone. There also isn't the space to overthink things because you've already got a child that's consumed you completely, but you've got the confidence of parenthood. You take that with you into your birth, and you take it with you that you've done it the first time, and you know that it doesn't always turn out the way you want it to, but you had your baby and you progress with life and you're stronger for it. And so that's why second births often happen at home. They're born before arrivals. They are unplanned home births because women don't trust that it's going to go as quickly as we say it does. And so their labour progresses really quickly because they've got that confidence. They're already in that limbic system. That oxytocin is already flowing, and they don't realise that, and all of a sudden they have a baby. And I guess what I want to put out there is what can we do to prevent that first traumatic birth? Your first birth is always going to be longer, and it's going to be physically and mentally more challenging because there's so much you have to work through. But the whole idea of me doing these classes for you all, and the reason I do what I do, is to try and prevent that first traumatic birth and try and prevent the 20%, 66% of women that have a Caesar that don't need to. And that comes back to that cascade of intervention. So many cesareans that happen, 2 out of 3 are unnecessarians, we call them. So the way we do that is by staying home, being informed, understanding how our body works, and using all the techniques that we've gone through, especially in the first class, to manage your physiological pain and be comfortable with it. The other thing I wanted to say with home birth too is that we are highly trained in obstetric emergencies as midwives. One of the best postpartum hemorrhages I've ever managed was the best postpartum hemorrhage I managed was at a home birth. I've only ever had one transfer, and this was it. And it sounds weird, but it was actually beautiful. And that was because my colleague and I knew each other to the nth degree. We knew what each other's skills were, and we just went ahead and did what we were good at and managed it. And I've been at so many hemorrhages and obstetric emergencies in hospitals, and there's so many people in the room and you don't even know who they are, and you don't know what things have been done and what things have been missed, and then all of a sudden everyone leaves again and this poor woman and partner are left there just going WTF. And we are going to talk about emergencies, and I'm going to explain them so you get more comfortable with them if they happen to you. That's a big thing that I really want to touch on, because obstetric emergencies do happen, and if you understand them more and can be more comfortable while they're happening, you'll have a much better outcome. But I just wanted to touch that. Have I mentioned how epic midwives are and how cool home birth is? All right, I'll shut up. Second stage. So I tried really, really hard tonight to get a mannequin and reenact birth for you, because I teach maternity emergency courses around Australia, and I love giving birth with the mannequin over and over again. But it didn't happen, so I'm sorry. So I'm going to use my little mannequin tonight. I know we're at an hour. We're just going to keep rolling, because otherwise I'm never going to finish these classes. It's going to be like December and I'm still going to be going on, and you're going to be watching with your 6-month-old. So second stage is from 10 centimeters dilated to the birth of your baby. Okay, typically we say for a first time pushing it lasts around 2 hours, and for a person that's had a baby before it lasts around 1 hour. Different for everyone, and if you've got an epidural on board, what we now know is that it is much safer, and you're going to have a much better outcome if we, when you're fully dilated, leave you for 1 hour to let the baby move down on its own. Because what's happening is when you get contractions, they push baby down lower and lower and lower. And so if you've got that epidural and you're fully dilated, your baby can start to slowly move down with every contraction, yeah? Because your body actually naturally pushes your baby out. And so epidurals were highly associated with vacuums and forceps, and we now know that waiting a bit longer decreases the risk of you having those interventions. All right, so what does a baby have to do to get out? It actually does this really cool dance called the Mechanisms of Labour. So this is an anterior baby, and it moves down like this. So its head comes out typically this way, okay? So it's facing your bum. So if you're on all fours, you see its face. If you're facing away, like you're kneeling or something, you'll see the back of the head if you're watching the birth. So baby comes out to here, and then it can't birth its shoulders that way, okay? It can't birth them in this position. And so what it needs to do is it needs to what we call restitute. And so the head will come out, and then it will wait, and we'll go through this in a bit more detail. Wait for a contraction, and then with the next contraction, as the contraction starts and the uterus starts to push down. So the uterus is like a plunger, yeah? Every time it gets a contraction, it pushes down. Oh, I didn't blow up my balloon. I still haven't given birth yet. But you've all seen that thing on YouTube, and if you haven't, Google it. I think I've given up on that. So the head has to turn to the side, and it turns to whichever side it wants to, and it comes out so that the shoulders can be borne that way, because they're the widest diameters, yeah? And so it comes out, rotates, and turns. And then once those shoulders get out, often we just pull the baby, but babies know how to be born on their own. They actually, it's a fetal ejection reflex. You don't, we're called accoucheurs, so we catch the baby. Literally, that's what we do, and you're birthing it. No, I don't deliver babies. Babies are born and the birthing person births them. I just catch them sometimes. Sometimes the partners catch them, sometimes the woman catches them. And if that's something that's important to you, make sure that your birth care provider knows that. So first birth is a lot longer. It's really important in labour and birth to wee, because your bladder sits in front of the head, or in front of the uterus, and so it needs to be empty to help baby move through. Now, a lot of people define second stage as fully dilated. That's the medical term. I think most midwives you speak to, and I don't think I'd be alone here in saying this, is that I think you need that urge to push as well. And so often women get to fully dilated, but that bub might not be low enough or in the right position. And so that urge to push isn't there. That urge to push is the most primal, all body consuming event ever. It's this whole body surge of like, yeah, that baby, and you hear it. Like as midwives, we hear that before we see anything else. So I don't do a lot of vaginal examinations in labour, and I often don't do one to confirm you're fully dilated because there's so many other signs out there. So what happens around transition, if your waters haven't broken, they typically break then, but some babies will be born in the sac. But around that, 8 to 9 centimeters, you'll start to often, especially if your baby's in that correct position, feel pressure in your bottom. And what often happens is at the peak of the contraction. So the contraction starts, it gets stronger, 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 and then it fades off and you get a rest. At the peak of the contraction, you'll start to feel pressure. And that means if it's not there the whole way through, it typically means there's cervix still left. So you've still got a little bit of dilating to do. And so the best thing you can do is breathe through it. Horse's breath, relax the jaw, relax everything, let that baby come down. And then you'll get to the stage where there is nothing you can do. You can't resist that urge to push anymore. And so what we're doing and what's happening when you're getting that little urge at the peak of the contraction, when there's still a bit of cervix left, is the baby starting to move down more, and it's moving down onto that rectum and around that coccyx area. We don't want to push on a cervix that's still there, that hasn't fully opened, because it swells. And it's like a door that gets wet and then it can't open. Once it's swollen, it is a lot harder for it to open. And midwives out there, if you don't know this trick, ice on the cervix, it sounds really weird, but you don't actually feel it as the birthing person. You put ice up and put it on the cervix, and it helps to not have it so swollen anymore. So we really want to prevent you from pushing until that cervix is fully open. But in saying that, there are lots of things that we watch for. So there's this bulge on the back, and if you go through my Instagram things, you'll see it. It's called the rhombus of Michaelis, and it's where you can actually see a bulge here from the baby's head pushing down before it comes onto that curve. And so it pushes all this out, and you actually get like the shape of a head. It's really cool. And we know that about then you're around 8 to 9 centimeters, and the head just hasn't dropped down into that bit yet. So as you can see, it hasn't, so it's here, and then it hasn't dropped down to that bit. So once it drops onto that bit, that's where that pressure in your coccyx is quite intense. You've got a 34 to 36 centimeter head circumference coming through your pelvis, and it does feel like this is being ripped out a little bit. I'm not gonna lie, it feels like it's being ripped out a lot. That was probably the biggest shock for me in birth, was feeling that pressure and that movement of my baby through the birth canal. But at this stage, you're not just experiencing that physiological pain anymore. You're working with it, and that's why birth can be such an awesome physical event, because you're working with your body's pain and movement and function to birth a baby. And so all that hard work that you did to get there, you now get to use that pain and put it to good use and birth your baby and give your baby a birthday, which is going to be the best day of your entire life. And you get to finally see what they look like and touch them and kiss them, and it's just, I'm really jealous you're getting to go through that soon, because it's the most incredible thing ever. And so what we want to do is we want to build that pressure. So if you were to say to me, I've got pressure, I would often say, is it there just at the peak? Yes, all right, breathe through. And really, we want you to breathe through as much as you can. And that diaphragmatic breathing that I teach in my program, we want to do that in between contractions, because we want the pelvic floor to lengthen in pushing, okay? So as baby moves down, if that pelvic floor is too tight, it can hold things up. It can slow the process down, and so we really want to relax. And so we also want the pelvis to open, which is why we want upright positions or fours rather than laying down on the bed. When you lay down on the bed, that weight actually closes this diameter, and so we call a lot of, when babies, I shouldn't say this, but bed dystocia, we talk about a lot as midwives. When you're stuck on the bed in that position, it doesn't make sense to birth like this when we're flat on our backs. And anyone out there who's birthed, what does it feel like you need to do when you need to give birth? Anyone tell me? We'll have a look. Poo. You often feel like you need to poo. Now, who poos laying down? Who goes, oh yeah, I've got a lot of pressure in my bum, I need to poo, I'm just going to lay down for that? How hard do you think it would be to push out a poo laying down? Now, if you've done my program, you know I talk about pooing a lot, and I talk about the Ulcha technique that I teach, and that's on Instagram too. It's about being able to facilitate and get used to that pressure and get used to your body actually pushing the poo out on its own. It sounds really weird. You're probably thinking, who is this woman and what is she talking about tonight? But our bodies were actually designed to push poo out on our own. They're more muscles and everything contracts, and we're a pressurized unit. And so the Ulcha technique is a way of actually letting your feces come out on your own. And I teach it in pregnancy because it's a really powerful tool to be able to let your baby be birthed on its own through just simply breathing and going with the urges and pushing when you need to, but relaxing the pelvic floor in between. So no one's going to poo laying down like this, and birth is exactly the same. You want gravity, you want to open the pelvis, you want to create as much space as you possibly can in that pelvic outlet, and you want everything to be able to relax in between contractions. So the other thing I want to touch on is the Squatty Potty. I talk a lot about doing poos with your feet up. And your knees higher than hips and your feet flat. If you are using the toilet or squatting or doing anything like that, your heels need to be your feet need to be flat and your heels need to be touching something. So lots of people try and push on a birth stool or a toilet and they're up on their toes. That's not going to help the pelvic floor move away and the pelvis to open. So make sure if you're doing that, you've got something that props your feet up and has your knees higher than your hips so that the pelvic floor moves away, everything opens and allows baby to come down more. All right, so we get to that fully dilated, we get that urge to push, and it's that real... and baby comes down, that contraction starts to build, and so as it builds, the uterus is starting to push down, yeah, and so it builds until you can't control it anymore and you're pushing down. There's two ways to push: directed pushing, where I sit there and go push, and we sound like we're like a whole lot of clucky hens going push. Don't get me wrong, I've had to do that at birth, and that goes back to me being the midwife that the woman or the birth person needs me to be. There are some births where that is what has to happen and that's what works, and if that's what works for you, awesome. But research shows this, that directed pushing actually slows down your second stage and takes longer to push your baby out. That kind of directed pushing works well with epidurals, but if you're pushing your baby out on your own, the best thing you can do is listen to your body, and we've talked about this for the last 3 weeks. If you don't know how to listen to your body now, don't expect to be an expert on it for the first time ever when you're pushing a baby out. Start listening to your body and understanding what that actually means in pregnancy so that you can tune into it and do it during labour and birth. So what happens with bub? And this is more a first-time birth than a second, because muscles have memory, and with a second baby there's a lot more confidence and you just push baby out typically. And often people will say, I can't believe how much I didn't have to push. I had my first baby, I pushed actively, like strongly pushed maybe for 10 minutes, and I had an intact perineum, and I didn't feel that ring of fire because he didn't sit on the peri. I just pushed him out, and that was the joy of having a really relaxed pelvic floor. So that diaphragmatic breathing, there's a reason I bang on and on about it. It's the way we're meant to breathe, and it's the way we're meant to breathe, especially in childbirth. So baby comes down with every contraction and then comes back up. And so this is when you have been pushing for a while, people think we're lying to them. And I often encourage women to touch their babies. Pop a finger in the vagina and actually feel it. If you're not trusting it, or you don't know where your baby is, or you're struggling to push or know if you're pushing right, you can do that. It's not going to appeal to everyone, but it's your vagina, just like it's your fingers and your hands. Don't be scared of your own body part, and don't be scared to be the first person to touch your baby. It's definitely something you can do. Obviously you want clean hands, and if there's risks of infection there, it's not just touch your baby. Let's just say that. I'm trying to cover all bases and be really diplomatic, but I'm just going to say it. Just touch your baby. It's your baby's head. You're going to touch it as soon as it comes out anyway. So bub comes down, comes back up again, comes back down, comes back up again. And what it's doing is it's protecting you and it's protecting it. And sometimes you'll see, especially with first time babies, them come out and they'll have like a cone head and they'll have it this way. And that means that its head's been asynclitic. But babies are able to move around and rotate. They know what they're doing. They're wriggly little suckers and they can get out. But often when they've got that big cone head, that will go down within a day or two, but it means that they've really been trying hard to work through that birth canal, and that's may take a little bit longer. So you wait for the pressure to build and the contraction, and then you're breathing, and on the exhale you're pushing down. Lots of pushing is encouraged with holding breaths, and you hear doctors and midwives say it over and over again: hold your breath, chin to chest, push. That actually doesn't work with our pelvic floors, and it doesn't work with our cores. In saying that, I've definitely directed women to push like that, and every birth is different. But if you are going with your body and just breathing through, and baby's well and you're well, and it's not a rush to get baby out, because sometimes it is a rush right at the end. Baby doesn't love being stuck down there and getting its head compressed for too long. And so if there is fetal distress, you will get the stern midwife me that goes, right, it's time to get your baby out, let's do this. And if the only thing that works is you holding your breath and pushing down, then we'll do it. So there's no one way to do anything. There's definitely optimal ways, and that would be to diaphragmatically breathe on an inhale, on an exhale, below, and push your baby down, or roar, or howl, or hoot, or holler, or moan, or groan, or fuck, because that's how my son was born, and he knows how to use that word in content sometimes too. But I was still exhaling, and so when I was doing it, I was working with the way my body is designed, and that intra-abdominal pressure works the best. So I'm probably saying a lot of things that don't make sense unless you have done my program, but basically inhale, let everything lengthen, open that pelvic floor and get used to opening it now. Exhale, push down. And so baby comes down, comes back up again, comes down, comes back up again. And typically with that first birth, you get, this is my labia, or the introitus of my vagina. We come down and we slowly start to see the head, and then it might stop like this, and that's crowning. Yeah, so we've got that crowning, and this is where women feel the ring of fire, because everything's being stretched. And so you have a break, and then you get another contraction, and then a bit more, and so we slowly see. I'm probably going to ruin I got all dressed up for you guys tonight. I just went nicely over my eyes. I didn't wear my mascara. I hope this bit doesn't go viral. And then we get to the chin. Whew, that was hard work. And then baby rotates and then bursts its shoulders. I think I squeezed snot out, but that, you guys are going to poo in labour, so in birth, so it's all good. It's the most euphoric thing to actually work with your body and go with it, and that's where a lot of women feel a lot of strength when they're able to do that rather than being directed. But with an epidural, it's a lot harder. You will need direction. Make sure your care provider does not do this on your vagina. Talk to them about that in pregnancy. So if this is the vagina sweeping down, there's no evidence for that. We're going to start talking about tearing and episiotomy in a minute, and I'll come back to that. So Waterbirth. It takes a long time to fill a pool, and so you ideally want to have that in labour and not wait till birth. I missed out on a Waterbirth because I didn't fill my pool quick enough. So if you are coming into the hospital and you've done, as I've said, and you've waited until right at the end, tell them you want a Waterbirth, ask them to fill the pool. A lot of people love the water because of its weightlessness. Some women will labour in the water, they won't birth in the water, and if you're high risk, your care provider may not support birth in water. So that burning, that stretching, that stinging that we just talked about, what do you do if you burn yourself? You put it under water. You run it underwater, and that's where Waterbirth, so many women love it because it takes away that ring of fire. They don't feel it at all because they're in a warm water environment. Now, if Waterbirth freaks you out, I want you to think about what baby's in the sac, okay? So it's in amniotic fluid. It's all its noses and lungs and everything are filled with water. There's no air in the baby's lungs. They're completely filled with water. So your baby is filled up, and that's why babies are really sneezy post-birth. So don't get scared around coronavirus. A lot of people right now are really scared because their newborn babies are sneezing a lot. It's actually really normal in that first 24 to 48 hours because baby's just getting all the fluid out. So when you have a water birth, your baby goes from water into water. We know that babies don't breathe until air touches their skin. So with a water birth, it's really important that if you birth your baby underwater, you stay underwater until baby comes up. If you stand, or we get you to stand and the head's out but the body isn't, you can't then go back into water because air's touched its skin. So that's the biggest concern we have around water birth. It is completely safe. It is a beautiful way to welcome your baby into the world, and please don't be scared of it because it's not going to drown. It's already filled with fluid. It hasn't converted to our extrauterine life where we use our lungs to breathe. So that's all I'm going to say about water birth. If you've got any other questions, hit me up afterwards. Let's get into the push it real good. Dun, 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 lover. Dun, 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 dun. You're needed. Welcome back, midwife Mick, everybody. Or doula Mick. He said to me in my pregnancy that he wanted to be a doula, and then during my labour he's like, I don't want to do this anymore, and I was like, too bad you are, but get a doula. Doulas are epic. Hey?
You need me?
Yeah, I need you. Can you
It's
take
back.
the camera back?
Yep.
Yeah, we've still got people here. People are laughing and crying. Everything's going on. Okay, so
Stand back for a sec.
I just picked a wedgie out on live TV.
Yeah,
How
you
was
did.
that?
All right.
So sexy.
Done.
Can you see us?
Yeah.
We all good?
Yeah. I'll take your time.
So we want to there's lots of different positions you can push in. You can be on hands and knees. So the majority of babies I catch, women are on hands and knees. So again, we're opening that pelvis, allowing baby to move down. If you birth in this position, your midwife or doctor will bring the baby through here and you lean back and hold baby. And if you've watched my birth video, which is on Instagram, that's exactly what I do. And then this is a really good position too. So sometimes when you're really struggling to give birth, just lifting one leg and even just rocking a little bit and moving around. So often if you're listening to your body and bub's a bit asynclitic or not really straight where you want it bub to be, you'll feel this urge to all of a sudden just start to move and get a little bit sexy with it.
Yeah, you will.
And they can hear you, by the way. That's what you want to do. So this one leg up, one leg down position works really well. Again, you can touch baby, you can be there for it if you want to. Using a mirror, a lot of people are freaked out by this concept, but if you're struggling to push, especially if you've got an epidural, please don't shy away from it if your midwife or doctor encourages you to use it, because it's actually a really awesome tool. When you can see that when I do this, this happens and I can see more of baby's head, it's a really, really great idea. And other people just want to watch, so they often have a mirror there. You get into it. It's your birth. Do whatever the hell you want to do and what you're comfortable with. But sometimes if people are suggesting things to you, don't be afraid of them. We're suggesting it to you for a really valid reason because we think it's going to help and get it over and done with quicker, especially standing up. So when I was in the Solomons, this one day we had 6 women labouring together, and this one woman went in, it was her 6th baby. She went in, she was the first birth of the day, and she gave birth standing up. And that was a big thing when I was there to educate the midwives on trying to get the birth positions, because they'd lay down flat, legs up in stirrups on this like half kind of bed and push babies out that way. And they'd all say, they'd all be going like this. So they'd be on their back and they'd be arching their back up because their body would want them to move. And the midwives would say, Arsie blow you down, down and Arsie blow you, which is pigeon for put your bum down on the bed. And they, you know, just be like, me feel like poo-poo, me feel like poo-poo. And they'd be moving their butts up, and I'd be like, just get them off the bed. So this woman birthed her 6th baby, and she came out to the other 5 women labouring and was like, in pidgin, basically said to them, that was the best birth I've had out of all my 6 babies. You all need to birth standing up. And that day we had 6 standing up births, and that really shifted my ability to inform the midwives about different birthing positions. So there's also squatting. As I said to you, Nick, do you want to come and help for this bit, please? Feet flat on the ground. So we are very toey in our society. We shouldn't be. We should be heelsy. When we're on our toes, we put a lot of pressure on our knees. It's not great for birthing because you put your clothes off the pelvis. So grab me under my arms. He never did any of this because he was asleep until just before I pushed. And so you can really hang down like this and push down.
What you're going to do.
Oh, sorry. This is something we didn't rehearse earlier. They might not be able to see us. Might have to move this way. Oh, okay. And so you can really hang down and hang off your partner like that. Mm-hmm. And you can kind of come down like this way as well, that same thing. One of my favourite techniques is that yin yang, so creating opposing pressure. You get so nervous, you're so cute. Well, hang on. This. Okay, so everyone, if you've got a birth support person with you, get up. Yep, get off the couch. You too. Yep, and you. Some of them are lazy, aren't they?
Sneaky.
Okay, so if you've been following me for a while, I sustained my first birthing injury the other day, and it was from doing this. And so what you need to do is stand up and...
Don't do it on a rug.
Don't do it on a rug. Is you're pulling, like a tug of war. So you're pulling your
Don't do it in socks off the tiles.
Woo! And so what I want you to feel is what you have to do to be able to do that. So to be able to hold yourself up, so stand up and then pull. Yeah? Can you feel that your core engages to be able to do that? And they're the muscles you need to use to push. So this technique can work really well if you're struggling to push and if you're in the water. So lots of women really want a water birth, and then they get in and they just can't get the traction. They can't get that bearing down because there's nothing to hold on to or nothing to push against. So on all fours, you're pushing against the floor. I was in the shower pushing against the wall. You want that push and pull kind of movement to help you bear down. And so that technique works really well. Your partner can come in. I've caught a lot of babies on the bed where the bed's up, and so imagine you're the bed. I'm kind of like leaning, so hang on, you're the bed here. I made videos in the hospital, and my hospital didn't support me to use them. I made all this stuff for you guys and I wasn't allowed to use it, so sorry, we've just had to improvise. But you lean up over the bed, and so the end of the bed is here, and you're on your knees here, or you've got one leg up there, or you can be squatting down. Lots of beds have a bar, and the bar is the same technique we're using here. They've got a bar that goes up and over, and so they grab onto the bar and move down. And so this is why exercise is really important. Hint, hint, if you haven't got my program yet, it's apparently really good, people love it. To be able to move and squat and wiggle it just a little bit. Be dynamic. So there's that. Partner can go, birth support person, around the end of the bed, and you can go like this. The other thing you can do is use... They're getting honest to me, aren't they? Hold this. Right. So you can use a rebozo to do the same thing. And I'm going to post some pictures of it on Instagram and Facebook over it. Exactly the same thing. It's that pulling. So I feel my muscles much stronger when I use this. Do you?
Yes.
Yes. Good answer. So this can be really helpful. You can also, if you're birthing at home, I don't know how hospitals would think about this, but you can tie a knot in this end, and you're going to be a door.
Yeah.
Okay. Be a door.
Yeah, sure. So it's shut.
Yeah, so the door.
The door jam. Yep.
Yeah. So there's a knot, there's a door jam, and then you can come down and really just pull on it there. Yep. Or you can come, you got me? This is live TV, I can feel right on my arms. Is come down like this and really just, again, push it. Push it real good. All that kind of thing. So there's lots of things you can do. The most bestest thing, 9:30 at night, I'm getting tired, is to actually listen to your body and do what it needs to do. And I've seen women, where that baby's coming down, it's getting a bit stuck on that pubic bone, and you'll see them just start to flick their leg and to move around, and it's this amazing thing to watch a woman or a birthing person be so connected to their body to help shift it down. All right, anything you want to tell the people out there? They've all been asking about you.
No.
Oh, come on, we talked about this.
Bring the rug back.
Oh, bring the rug back.
It's bothering me. Yeah.
I think we're all done.
We're good?
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Now, one more thing, tearing versus episiotomy. Can you bring me back? Come, say something to all the birth partners and support people.
Hey there. Congratulations. Have a nice birth. You're not being very specific. Do you
I
want
thought
me
you
to
were
hear or
going
not?
to encourage them and tell them, yeah, I just need that back.
Okay.
That back and that on there.
Yeah.
All right, so tearing and episiotomies really quickly, and then we are done. I think we're done. So, where are my scissors? Are people still actually watching?
Yeah.
Oh, where did the scissors go? Okay, so this is the tip. Hide the scissors. This is what midwives do all the time. They hide the episiotomy scissors so they can't be done. So what I was actually taught. There they are, I found them. And then now it's happened in real life. Okay, so tearing versus episiotomy. It is really common, especially in your first baby, to tear. Some people don't. There's a whole lot to do with it, including genetics and things like that. But there are some things that decrease tearing. So we're going to talk about those. And I'm going to show you the difference between tearing and episiotomy. So I've got a piece of paper here. If I tear it, okay, can you see how there's like, I don't know if you want to call them like microfibers?
Yeah.
Yeah? Those are on one side and they're on the other. And when I put it back together, it meets perfectly. Okay? Oh, the scissors have gone again. When I cut, we don't get any of that. Okay? And it doesn't ever really, it meets back, but it doesn't fit back together. It's the best way I can explain tearing versus episiotomy. Tearing is your body's way of making room. It needed to make that room, and it did it to the extent that it needed to. Cutting is done by us. In 13 years, there's only been 2 births that I've been at that have needed episiotomies, that I've actually gone, yeah, they really needed them. One the doctor did, and the other one I was heavily pregnant, and I could not do that to another woman while I was heavily pregnant, and so I've never actually done one. And there are lots of women I've cared for that have been intact. It's got nothing to do with us, but there are things that we do in labour that can, or birth, that can decrease it. So you are much better to tear than you are to be cut. The only research there is that says that you should be cut is when your baby is distressed, which means its heart rate has dropped, and we're worried about its health, and we want to get it out quickly. And the way, and cutting and having more space will enable us to do that. There are some babies that we see just sit on the perineum, and that perineum is not stretching at all, and then the heart rate goes down. They're a prime example of, okay, if that body hasn't torn, we've given it a good chance to tear, it hasn't done it, and an episiotomy is valid there, because that baby's heart rate is not going, or that baby is not going to enjoy sitting on the perineum for that long. So yes, there are some instances where an episiotomy should be done, but not at the rates that we do them, and it's a really old school practice. You will have a higher rate of having one, a high incidence of having one, if you've had a vacuum or a forceps. This is often doctor preferred. I've worked with some doctors who do incredible vacuums and episiotomies, absolutely beautiful instrumental births, and they don't cut. I will say with forceps, it does enable more room. So with vacuum, the vacuum goes on the baby's head. We're going to talk about that next week. And you don't need extra room. Whereas forceps, you've got to put both the forceps into the vagina. And so you need more room. And I wasn't always for episiotomy with that. But I think if you're going for a forceps, you want it to be successful and you want to prevent a cesarean, and episiotomy can be a really good idea. So talk to your care provider about what they prefer and what they do, and then think about what you want. But typically the evidence says that actually it's gone back and forwards with instrumentals. So it used to say they weren't necessary to have an instrumental birth, you didn't need an episiotomy, and now we're kind of saying, we're going back to saying, yeah, actually it might be better to do that. So it's not concrete, but it should not be routinely done at all, and it should only be done if your baby's in distress and it's going to expedite birth, aka make it happen sooner. So tearing, a normal life event that often happens. Most birthing people are scared about it happening, and I can understand that, but it's not anything you feel. Everything stretches and opens and is sore. It's not like you actually feel the tear. Your body heals beautifully, and that area is a closed area. It's not like we walk around with our legs separated. So it's a really beautiful, highly blood, visceral area that heals really well. The two things that decrease tearing are perineal massage and warm compress. So let's talk about perineal massage first. That is, there's really great research that supports perineal massage and says that it decreases tearing. I cannot deny that at all. I'm not a huge fan of it, and there are a couple of reasons why. First of all, when you are heavily pregnant, so you're meant to start perineal massage at 35 weeks. You can't even see where your baby's coming out from, let alone get down there. So you often require somebody to help you do that. And being down there as a partner, if you've got a partner and they're helping you do that, can often feel like they can often feel like that maybe it needs to lead to sexy time, and you probably don't really feel like that. I don't know, I'm generalizing here, but often that's what happens. You're down there, you're massaging a perineum, it's a bit intimate and sexual, whereas you're like, oh, just it's burning for the person that's doing it. Yeah, so perineal massage is about stretching the perineum till it burns. So there's nothing sexual or nice about it for the person having it done to them. And so they're the two biggest reasons why I'm not the biggest fan of it. I also feel like the body can actually do what it needs to do and stretch, but the evidence says that it decreases tearing. So I'm going to pop up a link on how to do it. There's a really great thing from the MARTA that tells you, goes through step by step, but you basically getting your thumbs, if you're doing it to yourself, and stretching until you feel a burning feeling, and you're using oil like coconut oil or olive oil to stretch, and if your partner's doing it, they're using their fingers. Doing it in birth does not prevent tearing, and it is so intrusive. You are pushing a baby out of an area that is stinging and burning. To have someone touch that area is just negligent, in my opinion. You just should not touch any part of a person's vulva when they're birthing, because it's sore and it just adds pain. And when you increase that pain, there is that chance that you're going to increase that adrenaline and decrease that oxytocin and stuff that birth up. But the best thing you can have, and I'm a huge fan of this, if you're birthing on land, so you're not having a water birth, is having a hot water compress placed on the perineum. So that just means a warm cloth. And we basically get a cloth and place it on the perineum, and it feels like heaven. I've never had a woman or a birthing person that hasn't loved it. And typically I get the water and sprinkle it around from the clitoris on, so squeeze the water, it runs down, and then hold the perineum, hold the pad on the perineum, and that decreases, research has shown, decreases 3rd and 4th degree tears, and it's the best thing that we have to do that. So make sure your care provider does that. If they don't believe in the research, print it out for them. All right, we are officially done at, I took an hour and 40 again, sorry. I hope you've enjoyed that. I've lost a fair few of you, but most of you are still here. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for your support. You guys have been absolutely amazing. And for those of you that have reviewed me on Facebook, I really appreciate it. Have a beautiful week. Tuesdays have quickly become my favorite day, and I love hearing from you all and how much more empowered you all feel for having a birth. Next week we talk complications, and I look forward to talking to you all about that.